Welcome to Story English Hub, where stories help you learn English. Today, we have a story called The Lost Key. Through this story, you'll improve your vocabulary, practice grammar, and enjoy a fun, engaging tale. Whether you're a beginner or an intermediate learner, this story will help you take your English skills to the next level. So, let's dive in and see what happens when Emma loses something very important. The Lost Key. It was a typical autumn afternoon when Emma decided to go for her usual walk to the park. The leaves had begun to change color, painting the trees in shades of gold, red, and orange. The crisp air carried the scent of pine and fresh earth, and there was a certain quietness that Emma found comforting. She always loved these walks because they gave her time to think, to unwind, and to simply enjoy the peace that came with being outside. Emma had a routine. She would stop by the small cafe at the corner of her street, buy a coffee, and walk to the park, where she'd find her favorite spot under an old oak tree. From there, she would spend her afternoon reading, watching the people pass by, or simply losing herself in the calmness of the park. On this particular day, she had chosen a book of short stories, something light that didn't demand too much attention. She wasn't really in the mood for anything serious. As she strolled down the path that led to the park, she absentmindedly reached into her pocket to feel for her house key. It was a habit she had developed after losing it once before. Her fingers fumbled around, but instead of the familiar cold metal, she felt nothing. Panic started to creep in. She stopped in her tracks and pulled out her other pocket. Still nothing. Her mind began to race. Did I leave it at home? She thought. No, I remember locking the door. I always lock the door. She turned around and quickly retraced her steps, looking down at the ground as she walked, scanning for any sign of the small, silver key. How could I have lost it? Emma thought to herself, her heart beginning to race. She had been so careful lately after that last time she'd misplaced it. That was weeks ago, but the memory of being locked out for hours, waiting for a locksmith, was still fresh in her mind. She stopped at the cafe where she had bought her coffee. "Excuse me," she said to the barista behind the counter. "Did I leave a key here by any chance?" The barista, a young woman with dark hair tied in a messy bun, shook her head apologetically. "No, I don't think so. Sorry." Emma sighed and thanked her before stepping back outside. She felt the cool breeze on her face, but it didn't calm her like it usually did. Instead, it reminded her that the day was getting colder, and soon the sun would begin to set. I can't be locked out again, she thought, her mind racing through the possibilities. Maybe she dropped it on the sidewalk or in the park. Or maybe, just maybe, it was still in her bag, buried under her book or her wallet. But she had checked there already, hadn't she? She hurried to the park, her footsteps quick and purposeful now, her eyes scanning the ground in front of her. She tried to retrace her steps, to remember every little detail. She had walked through the gate, past the fountain, and sat down on her favorite bench for a moment before moving to the oak tree. Her bench was empty, and as she approached, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe the key had fallen out of her pocket when she sat down. She crouched down beside the bench, running her hands along the grass, hoping to feel the familiar cold metal against her fingertips. Nothing. The panic that had been slowly building in her chest was starting to grow, threatening to overwhelm her. She moved to the fountain, thinking that maybe she had dropped the key there when she stopped to watch the ducks earlier. The fountain was a small stone structure with clear water gently spilling over the edges. Emma had always loved watching the ducks swim lazily around the pond, their calm movements a stark contrast to the anxiety she now felt. She crouched down beside the fountain and looked into the water. There was nothing but the reflection of the cloudy sky and the ripples made by the ducks. She sighed and stood up, rubbing her temples as if that might help clear her thoughts. "Okay. Think," she told herself. Where else could it be? She retraced her steps once again, but this time more slowly, paying closer attention to the ground. People passed by her, some walking their dogs, others pushing strollers or jogging, but Emma barely noticed them. Her mind was entirely focused on the key, on getting back into her apartment. I could call a locksmith, she thought, but the idea filled her with dread. Locksmiths were expensive, and she had already spent too much the last time this happened. Besides, the thought of standing outside her building for hours, waiting for someone to show up, was not appealing in the least. As she wandered around the park, searching every corner she had visited earlier, she heard a voice behind her. "Are you looking for something?" She turned to see an older man standing a few feet away, holding a small object in his hand. He had a kind face, wrinkled with age, but smiling warmly at her. Emma's eyes widened as she saw what he was holding. "My key," she exclaimed, relief flooding through her. She rushed over to him, barely able to contain her gratitude. "Where did you find it?" The man chuckled softly. "It was over by the gate. I figured it must belong to someone in the park." Emma took the key from him, her fingers trembling slightly. "Thank you so much. I don't know what I would have done without it." The old man nodded. "You're welcome, young lady. I've lost things before too, and it's always a relief when they're found, isn't it?" Emma nodded, her heart finally beginning to slow down. "It really is," she said, smiling. "Thank you again." As the man walked away, Emma stood there for a moment, clutching the key in her hand as if it were the most valuable thing in the world. She felt silly for having panicked so much, but at the same time, she was immensely relieved. She had been lucky this time, but she knew she needed to be more careful in the future. After taking a deep breath, Emma decided to sit down on the bench for a while to calm her nerves before heading home. She pulled out her book and opened it to the first page, but her mind wasn't really on the story. Instead, she kept thinking about how easily she had almost lost the key and how differently the day could have turned out. As she sat there, watching the last of the sunlight filter through the trees, she smiled to herself. Sometimes things don't go as planned. But in the end, everything has a way of working out. 1. Why did Emma start to panic when she couldn't find her key? 2. What places did Emma check while searching for her key? 3. How did Emma feel after the old man returned her key? Thank you for listening to The Lost Key, brought to you by StoryEnglishHub. We hope you enjoyed the story and learned some useful English along the way. Don't forget to practice the new words and grammar we covered today. Be sure to check out our other stories and subscribe for more fun English lessons. Leave a comment below and tell us what you would do if you lost your key. See you next time.